everything right, only to suffer horrific events that stymied decades of hard work and left him blind. The two most gruesome tragedies he suffered would make the fire-breathing Godzilla buckle in bitterness. Not Nozawa. He's grateful just to be alive. Nozawa had played high school football in Honolulu and later became a professional bodybuilder. When he moved to Washington, the muscle-bound Nozawa enrolled at the University of Washington's dental school, studied hard, and faithfully graduated. Yet, years later, after the opening of a handful of dental clinics, when he could finally afford the lifestyle he had always wanted, a tree came crashing down and foiled all his best laid plans. The second was when Dr. Nozawa was caught in the middle of a couple's domestic violence incident one fateful night. His neighbor first shot his wife, dead, then shot Nozawa in the head from 12 inches away before finally shooting himself. Two tragic events that would change his life forever. You may call it tragedy. The doctor said, misfortune is just disguised as an opportunity. I say Spirit has a plan for everyone from the beginning, and Dr. Nozawa's plan has just began. Missing both eyes now, Nozawa has to get used to moving about indoors and out. Shortly after the shooting and recovery, he realized that he desperately needed help learning to navigate, so he signed up for Washington State's Department of Services for the Blind, which took 10 months to be admitted to. In his words, the doctor says, dreams do really come true, but you have to believe it before you can see it. He said he has made his own dreams come true by helping others pursue their life aspirations. In his free 14-page book, Precipice of Potential, which can be downloaded from his website at www.drrandallgeorge.com. Nozawa asks provocative questions to help readers examine their own lives more closely, like, what do you do that fills you with joy and excitement? When is the last time that you gave something, anything, freely without expecting or wanting anything in return? What did you do with your last $20? Certainly food for thought. Dr. Randall Nozawa agrees with me that we are all family, and our conscious selves are and have been since the beginning a place where love, yes, love is the most important thing in our lives. And I am is a term which means self-love is a human trait that makes us all whole with the universe. It's my honor to introduce to you, to the universe, your host tonight, Mr. Randall George Nozawa. Oh yeah, doctor. Oh doctor, oh doctor.
Oh, Bob, what a great show today. The with all the fear and negativity going on, I wanted a show like this because in that just the wonderful and gracious introduction, you mentioned that one, we're family, and life is based on love, and I think many of us have forgotten that. But our guest today, and a very dear friend of mine, Nicholas Vassili, it represents all that. He comes from love. He is love, and he shares that with a over 77-year theatric life, and that outlives, I think, many of the people out there. But he's devoted his life to the arts, to music, to the performing arts, to entertainment, and in all aspects of stage and uh, theater presentations, as well as movies and such like that. And I'm so glad to have him on. And we need something like this. We need a guy like Nicholas in our lives, because when the current fear and negativity that's going on right now takes hold, look at what's happened to our world. And Bob, you as a 34, 35-year musician career that way, kind of know that well, how well you can affect other people in a positive way, because that's what we all share. So anyway, Nicholas, welcome, and let's talk about the theater, and let's talk about the arts.
I have often heard speakers say, I hardly know where to begin. And
well, here, I'm going to interrupt you first, because you're in the process of or finished up writing your newest book, and I don't know. You finished yet, but can you tell us more about your newest book?
Well, it's titled Class Acts and Pissants. I use the term pissants because it's more meaningful in terms of describing people rather than, say, scoundrel or rotten. So I kind of distinguish between the class acts in movies, theater, vaudeville that I've interacted with, as opposed to the pissants. I can't say, I'm happy to say that there haven't been an equal number of each. There have been more class acts than pissants. And when I think of my entire life, it's been just a series of events related to these people. I recall as a child listening to Jimmy Durante on the radio.
Oh boy.
And he would tell so many stories and sing so many songs. And one of his great taglines was, "I got a million of them." And
but he used to go, "I got a million of them."
I got a million of them. Right.
Exactly what he said.
I don't have a million of them, but I've got several thousand stories. So it's difficult to find a place to begin. So I thought earlier today I might start as far back as I could remember. As a child of 3 and 4 years of age, growing up in the Depression era in a tenement building in Manhattan,
Wow.
I recall my father bought a Victrola and would listen to grand opera. So we had a very early introduction to music from that point on. He was a restaurateur, chef, a remarkable chef, but on Sundays he would devote his time to playing music. He played the violin, viola, and cello and composed music, and did a little singing on the side also. And at other times, I would stay awake very, very late at night with a device which I'm sure 99% of the public will not have heard of at this point. It was called a crystal set. This was the forerunner to radio. And I can't tell you how it worked, but you had to.
You plug it on your radiator.
Yeah, something like that. God only knows. I can't remember.
It had an alligator clip on it and one wire going to the unit, and you take that little clip and you clip the thing on on a metal part of your window, or your radiator worked the best. And I mean, you see, now I'm showing my age. I mean,
I can't remember exactly those details, but I know I would be under my covers listening, and I recall on Saturday nights, I would, if I found the right point, catch the Grand Ole Opry, or on other nights I would pick up Al Jolson.
Oh, yeah.
And Jolie, as he was called, is renowned as one of the greatest performing artists of all time, especially if you lived in the 20s and 30s and early 40s. Al Jolson meant the top of the line in terms of performing artists, and was widely copied by so many people that followed. And one of Jolson's great line, we're going back to a war bond drive. They had as their star attraction Enrico Caruso, who was arguably the most noted opera tenor in world history.
Yeah.
You can talk about Pavarotti and so many other great voices, but Enrico Caruso, I think, is still regarded as the greatest voice of the 20th century. And so they had Enrico Caruso on this war bond drive, and he closed his performance singing Vesta la Juba, which is his signature piece, to a huge devotion of fans. They couldn't get enough of it. And then they introduced Al Jolson. And Jolson went up on stage in his inimitable fashion and turned to the audience and said, "You ain't heard nothing yet." And he would go from there and perform. And of course, he was as good as they come. So that's my early recollection of theater and radio and music. My next vivid memory, at the age of 6 or 7, I started singing. I'm not sure how that began, but I started singing. And one day my mother was taking me shopping, and in those days they had these booths that you could step into, and you put a quarter in, and you could record yourself doing whatever you wanted to do, and then get a little disc out of it. And I remember going in there, and she put the quarter in. I started singing what was a very popular love ballad at the time, "A small cafe, Mamselle, a rendezvous, Mamselle. The violins were warm and sweet, and so were you, Mamselle." So that was perhaps my first shot at performing. And it got to me. From there on in, I just wanted to be in front of an audience or in front of a radio. We didn't have a television yet, but that's where it all started for me. I was also very fortunate in that we lived at 512 West 135th Street in New York City in a tenement building, which was located a block away from what was then Lewisone Stadium, which was the mecca for pop concerts in America. And in the summer months, every night they would present one of the most famous world concert artists. And my cousin, who I called my beloved cousin Tony, was the voice, the Greek voice of Voice of America. And his close friend was Dimitri Mitropoulos, who was the conductor of the New York Philharmonic and conducted the concerts during the summer at Lewisone Stadium. And he got a free pass, which he didn't use, so he gave it to us. So my brother and I would go across the street to Lewisone Stadium and hear these great concerts. And here's an important point to make. They would generally be about 15 to 17,000 people at the concert. And being very young and not knowledgeable when it came to numbers and figuring out the reality of crowd size, I assumed that of the 15 to 17,000 people in the stadium, that was the entire city of New York. And of course it wasn't, but I took it to be. So to me, it seemed quite natural to be there among the rest of the city of New York. And my favorite occasion during the Lewisone Stadium concerts was Viennese night. And they would alternate from year to year between the great German soprano Elizabeth Schwarzkopf and the great Wagnerian tenor Lawrence Melchior, who had this huge booming voice. He became very popular in movies also. And at the close of his concert, he would do something that was just wonderful. He would somehow have the microphones follow him, and he would go out from the stage out to the audience, all the way up to the bleacher seat where I was sitting, and sing, "A friend on the left and the friend on the right, viva la compagnie, in willing endeavor our hands reunite, viva la compagnie." Bob, I know you're going to get called from Asians, but tell them I'm not available right now. But anyway, he came right up to me and pinched me on the cheek. And I never forgot that as long as I lived. So that was another great memory for me. Many years later, and I'm going to hop and skip around here rather than try to follow some sequential order. Many years later, I worked in a candy store as a soda jerk on Avenue M in Brooklyn, New York, just a few doors down from my father's restaurant. And one of the people that would frequent the candy store was none other than Rocky Graziano, who was then the middleweight boxing champion of the world. And Rocky would come in, usually smoking a cigarette, and read comic books, and just hang out. And this was before what I recall most, this was before his third championship fight with Tony Zale. They had had two previous matches together. In the first match, Tony Zale knocked Graziano out. In the second match, Graziano knocked him out. And Graziano was in a movie based on a book that he wrote called Somebody Up There Likes Me. And in the movie, it shows him in the candy store, which was his favorite hangout place. Anyway, here it was on the third fight, the night before the third fight, and he's sitting there at 11:30 at night, smoking and drinking Coke and reading comic books. And I turned to him and I said, "Rocky, aren't you fighting tomorrow night?" And he said, "Oh, don't worry, I'll murder him." And I said, "Oh, great, wonderful."
I'll murder the boy.
I'll murder him. He stayed for about another hour and a half. And then finally he got up to leave, and he threw about $5 on the table and gave me a real nice tip. And he was walking out, and I said, "I'm with you tomorrow night, Rocky." And he suddenly turned with a playfulness known to street fighters, and he ducked, and he threw a left hook out at me that caught me in the rib cage. And if you don't think it hurt, you're wrong. So along with Lawrence Melchior pinching my cheek, I had Rocky Graziano banging me in the ribs, and I never thought a kid could have it so good as that.
Hey, while you're talking about things like that, Doctor, I'm telling you, Nicholas is he's talking about things that I actually remember, believe it or not. And if not about the fighters, and then I only do the new guys, like all the new guys that I met on the road all over the United States. But here's one for you, Nicholas. Do you remember Henny Youngman?
Very much, yes.
Okay.
Great. I remember his great line. Take my wife, please.
And I knew his wife.
Ah, okay.
By the way, I'm telling you, man, she made Jewish chicken soup like you never had in your life. I'm telling you. She used to go, sit down. You got no weight on you. Sit down. So anyway, he was my great uncle, or was it a grandfather or uncle, and that actually hired him, and he worked for William Morris Agency in New York. Now, here's one that'll blow everybody away. My mother was in the room visiting her uncle, whatever, when he was hired, Henny, and he told a joke about a pigeon dropping something on somebody, right? Like flying over or whatever. That joke stuck with my mother her whole life, and she never ever liked him right up to the time that, and I did own a dental laboratory in New York. We made his false teeth. Now, you want to talk about things going through years and years and years and going around. I wasn't even born yet when my mother knew him, and I wound up making, before he passed away about 5, 6, 7 years later, I made his false teeth.
That's a
I mean,
story.
that'll take a bite out of you, won't it? But
Yep.
anyway, I'm serious. I mean, there's so many things that people forget that tie us all together every single day. It doesn't have to be an actor or anything. It could be anything. It can be the car you bought and now you got it from somebody else and you found a little card in it with somebody's name and you called them up 20 years later and said, I found this card in the car that I bought from somebody that sold it to somebody else. I'm serious. Things like this go around all over the place. And, that's where we were talking about the love before, but that's what you're talking about. It's the love that
Indeed.
you had for the business, for the acting, for the people connected to it. And as I always tell a doc, I said, if I sit down and I actually write a book, I'll have people laying on the floor.
Apropos of what you just said, in terms of the love being the most important thing, going back on my lifetime, I recall in high school, I was involved in producing Irving Berlin's Annie Get Your Gun.
Ooh, yeah.
And which is a wonderful, wonderful show. And I wasn't a leading man type, so I wanted to play a part in it. So I gave myself the role of Chief Sitting Bull, and which was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And we did it for 3 weekends in high school at James Madison High School in Brooklyn, New York, which is a mammoth school. There were, I would say, about 5,000 to 6,000 students.
Students, right.
And the last weekend, we did 3 shows that were sponsored by an organization called the Dora Shear Foundation of Handicapped Children. And after the performance, I went backstage to the dressing room to take off the gobs of makeup, and there was a knock on the door, and I reached back and opened the door, and there were a group of the handicapped children that had been taken to see the performance. And one of the young boys, who was obviously the spokesperson, turned to me and said, "Please, Mr. Sitting Bull, may we have your autograph?" And
good. Yeah, don't you feel good?
Yeah, talk about love and feeling good. I'll never forget that. And that just kept me moving toward the performing arts. And there are so many moments in time when I look back on it and not wanting to follow again some specific pattern. When I look back on the people I've met, and apropos of the title of my book, Class Acts and Pissants, the class acts have been just marvelous, marvelous people who I just stop and I say, how was I so lucky to have met them? And my wife, Nan, has often said to me that the reason you met them wasn't luck, you were just open to meeting them. And I think that's true. And I think along those lines, something, and it's connected with what you were talking about, Bob, you have to accept the fact that no matter how famous any of these people are, if you take a little pin out and prick your finger and their fingers, they will bleed just like you do.
Yep.
So if I had any advice to give to people about approaching those who we deem to be famous, don't be afraid. They're human beings. And you're going to meet the pissants. I recall being on a set doing a commercial with Robert Goulet, who had just come from his grand success on Broadway in Camelot.
Oh boy.
And although he wasn't world famous, certainly to the Broadway people, theatrical people, he was at the top. And he was doing this commercial, and I was an extra on the commercial. And by the way, I must stop and comment about being an extra, because often I've had people turn to me and say, well, you've had success doing what you're doing. Don't you feel that you're kind of lowering yourself being an extra? And I look at them and say, you got to be joking with me. The people who are fantasizing about being famous are standing on the outside. Meanwhile, the extras on the inside, where all the action's taking place, and he's not making a lot of money, but he's making some money, and he's getting a shot at doing things. And just to mention it, Lana Turner, who was often described as being discovered sitting on a stool in a store somewhere. No, she started out as an extra.
Right.
John Wayne.
Oh, who's looking?
John Wayne was an extra when John Ford discovered him. So you're better off being an extra than just fantasizing what it's like to be out there. Anyway, I was an extra on this commercial with Goulet, and movie sets, commercial sets, can be dangerous. And most people wouldn't know that unless they'd been on a set. There are wires hanging everywhere, cables. You have to be careful. And Goulet, for whatever reason, avoided stepping around a set of cables and almost fell on his face. And luckily, one of the stagehands nearby caught him. And Goulet, instead of showing some love and humility, went on his high horse. And he immediately looked at the extras, including me, in a threatening way and said, look where you're going. And as Randall could probably tell you, I'm not one to suffer fools lightly. I can get very angry, if not violent.
Ooh,
and I just moved toward Goulet, and I don't know, are we allowed to curse on the show, Bob?
Yeah, no, doesn't matter, because I know there's a ton of people listening, and let me tell you, we're all human.
Okay, I just turned to Goulet and got right in his face and said, why don't you shut the fuck up? And someone got between us and moved him away. So that's Robert Goulet. So there's an instance where someone doesn't show that kind of humanness. At the same time, I remember walking down a street on Broadway in the theater district, and who did I see walking toward me but Alec Guinness?
Oh, ouch. Nice.
And he had just won the Academy Award for Bridge on the River Kwai. And he was walking toward me, and I just stopped. And as he got toward me, I looked at him and said, excuse me, Mr. Guinness, would you mind if I talk with you for a moment? And the look on his face was just beautiful and so human. And he just said, yes, of course. And we chatted for about 10 minutes, and then I said, thank you, and we left. So you've got that juxtaposition between the class acts like Alec Guinness and the pissants like Robert Goulet. But just go at it. Don't be afraid. They're just human beings.
What really gets me, Doc, about how Nicholas talks about these people.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I remember these people. Most of the people that he talks about, and that are people who earned what they were doing. And some of them earned it and then abused it, like he was talking a few seconds ago.
Yep.
The thing is, So many of these people were in our eyes, your eyes and my eyes. These are people that who had to be revered to a degree because they were who they were because of themselves. They did it. All right, somebody gave them a hand, somebody gave them a break or whatever. That was the big thing. But once they got that break, they used it, and they used it well for what they're doing. You ever look at what's going on now in places like Broadway and other things like SNL, Saturday Night Live that I don't watch anymore because it doesn't make any sense. Things are not what they used to be. People are not loving. They're loving. There's very few that love the job like we did a long time ago. I mean, I did MAME. I was Junior Bob Babcock in that off Broadway at the time show. I know exactly what you're talking about because when you're, I mean, all right, I was on stage and I was a character, one of the main characters. But people come up to you and some of them say, "Could you sign this for me?" And other ones turn around and they say, "Why didn't you?" Or "You stunk." I actually had somebody say that one time. "You stunk." This happens all over the place. But today's people, oh man, I'm telling you, they get so wrapped up in themselves that they bring the rest of the world with them.
Yep.
That's
And,
not
and
correct.
there's so many
Yeah,
great people who are just, so willing to connect with you.
yeah, yeah. There are. I mean, yeah, but go ahead and go find them.
Well, you have to find them, but you have to be open to finding them.
Yeah.
I found one of those people a long time ago when I was doing seminars related to acting schools in New York City, and I was on a panel one afternoon with a gal who I can only describe as a sweetheart. Her name was June Havoc. Uh, June was famous as Baby June in the Broadway musical Gypsy.
Oh,
Um,
oh,
and her
yeah.
sister was the famous strip artist Gypsy Rose Lee. And so I met June, and after the seminar, uh, in her sweet, lovely fashion, she invited the three of the other people on the panel to have coffee with her. So I was able to chat with her. And many months later, I met her again at another one of these seminars, and we went out for coffee together. And just a delightful human being. And years later, when I was removed from my theatrical work and doing therapy work, I was in Pittsburgh for a 4-hour radio broadcast, and I was invited there to bring 3 ex-addicts who were part of the program I was working with to just describe their addiction and their problems. And to my delight, June Havoc was another guest on the show. And the ex-addicts were asked about their lives, and they went through their war stories, and they gave vivid accounts of all the things they went through being addicts. And then one of them turned to June and said, "What do you do?" Um, I didn't, and she, of course, wasn't going to jump in and explain that she was a Broadway actress, a Hollywood actress, and a best-selling novelist. I think one of her bestsellers was called Early Havoc. And she kind of looked at me. I kind of nodded as if to say, "Go, Jude, tell them who you are." So she went through some of her early life adventures leading up to the time when her and her sister and mother were caught in a snowstorm in the Midwest in the middle of winter without a dime to their name. And finally, they came and found a hotel that had a sign on it that read, "No actors or dogs allowed." And, uh, and June went on, and then she stopped and said, "I've lived a very difficult life. In fact, I can honestly say that I have gone through as much suffering as any Holocaust victim. But you know what? And she picked up her hand and banged it on the table and said, I've lived. And that to me is the key. No complaints, no feeling sorry for herself and all the things she was put through as a child, but that was life and she lived. And by the way, June lived to be 99. God bless her dear soul.
Yeah.
I think of so many other people, and here I'm going to go toward the other side of the coin, the pissants. We were living in Hollywood, and when you're in the movie business, you register with many, many different theatrical agencies. And I and my wife and my 4 children were registered with about 15 agencies. And one afternoon, we got a hurried call. They needed about 200 or 300 people for a shoot that night at the Rose Bowl.
Oh, boy.
This was a movie called The Last Boy Scout, starring Bruce Willis. And Bruce was not only the lead in the movie, but the co-producer. So we were, laughing about it. Well, that should be a fun shoot. So my wife and children went out, and night shoots are not easy because you're going to be going late at night and come home in the early hours.
So the sun goes. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, they went out about 4 o'clock and they came back about midnight or so and said that they never actually did any shooting. They had all sorts of technical problems, weather problems, camera problems. Anyway, that was okay. That's part of the whole Hollywood reality. The next morning, we got a call from the casting agency. And he said, I want to let you know before you find out on your own that Bruce Willis refuses to pay the people who showed up last night. And I said, what? And they said, yeah, and this is going to be a battle. At the time, there was something called the Screen Extras Guild, and they were supposed to step in situations like this, but they were afraid to because Bruce Willis was too important. Anyway, we were enraged by this. This is only step 1 in what became a 4-step episode with Bruce Willis.
Oh, brother.
Step 2, he was interviewed by the Hollywood Reporter just, I think, days later, and he shot his big mouth off about unions, saying they were the cause of the problem in Hollywood. Of course, he didn't bother to mention he was making $30 million as the star of this movie and another $20 million in the back end as a producer, but he's complaining about the unions. Step 2. Step 3, I'm on the set of Hook, Steven Spielberg's mammoth production, and the set had been the original set of the yellow brick road in the famous movie Wizard of Oz, and it also had been the set for Esther Williams's gigantic swimming pools. So the set is enormous. The boat was in the moat, and you've got about 300 people on the boat. And guess who decides to visit but Brucey?
Bruce Willis.
Right. He starts walking up the gangplank, and one of the grips way high up saw him and told everybody else. And as Bruce got on the boat, one of the teamsters screamed down to Steven Spielberg, Steven, get that rat bastard off the boat before we kill him. He was already on the boat. And Dustin Hoffman, who was very close by, recognized how dangerous this was, because you're talking about union people who had been insulted by this rat. who was complaining about them. So Dustin came over and put his arms around Brucey, and it was about 15 feet away from me. And he said, Brucey, I think you'd be wise just to get off the boat very quickly. In the meantime, about 15 cast and crew went down to the parking lot to find Brucey's car.
Oh.
And they found it and urinated all over it.
I thought they'd take the tires off.
Yeah. Now, that wasn't the end of it, unfortunately, because, pardon that phone ringing, I can't stop it for 3 rings, and I'll let it go at that. One more time, and it's finished. And this shows you how things can happen from one stage to the other unexpectedly because of the weakness of the Screen Extras Guild in failing to follow up and confront Bruce Willis. Within months, the Screen Extras Guild dissolved. So Brucey got away with this sick behavior, and I list him up there as one of the grand pissants of all time. And if I ever got in his face, I'd spit in his face for that. But not all of Hollywood is like that. There are the other people who are so wonderful, including Steven Spielberg, who I'd like to mention. Steven is known as a great filmmaker, no doubt. He has made his mark in the world of movies. Just to mention, of course, a few of his great movies: Jaw, E.T., Close Encounters, Schindler's List. I mean, you don't have to talk about his ability as a filmmaker, but one of the things that I'm so aware of is rarely do people talk about him as an individual. And in that regard, he is a class act. For instance, no matter how famous he is, how important he is, anyone who might walk up to Steven Spielberg could be the garbage collector. They might say, "Hey, Mr. Spielberg, I got an idea for your movie." Guess what?
He'd listen.
He'll listen. Not only listen, but in a sincere way. And he will spend untold sums of money to try your idea.
Yeah, well, we had Diane here, that's the media director, and that for Pyramid One. She met him, and that she used to work for a law firm in Manhattan that had about 100 lawyers in the place. And she was the researcher for these lawyers. She used to do all the research, background checks, and all that kind of stuff. And Steven was there one time, and she happened to meet him coming in from getting coffee. And he said, "Oh, I was going to buy everybody coffee. What'd you do that for?"
Yep. He's a wonderful human being. And one of the things that he did, which was so absolutely remarkable and loving, he would go out of his way to allow everyone to take part in creating the movie. He would, Tony Burton, who played Apollo Creed's manager in the first Rocky movie, and I would go into boxing routines on the set of Hook, and Dustin Hoffman would give us the opportunity to do that, and Steven loved it. He never complained about it. In fact, if you created a line that was not in the script, Steven would see that you got paid for that line.
Wow.
And I still receive residuals from the movie Hook because of Steven Spielberg's wonderful generosity. So I put him up there with class acts, and not just a wonderful filmmaker, but a wonderful man. I have a story I want to tell about Hollywood. I don't know how much time we've got, but
We got like 15 to 15 minutes, but I mean, we're already over when we started, so we could be over when we end.
one of my favorite stories in life, really. Um, Back in the 1960s, when I was kind of flying high, I was on the doorstep of great success, and then my life came apart. It was shattered completely. I lost everything I had, including my reputation, and ended up in very, very terrible shape on so many different levels. Ended up living in San Antonio, where I should never have been. Anyway, I get on a bus to return to New York City, totally broken. 51-hour bus ride, get to New York City. I think I had about $40 to my name. And I found a cheap hotel in Chelsea and just lay down on the bed for about 14 hours just to try and find myself. I woke up and I shaved and showered and just went out. And my intent was to find a place where I could just sit and have a cold beer and maybe nibble on some food. So I see a little bar and I go up to the second floor, and it's a small little bar room with about 5 or 6 tables and a bar set up and a TV overhanging. And there's a waitress, small lady in her 50s, cleaning a table for a couple who have just finished their meal. And I go up to the bar and I sit on a stool and I wait politely. And the waitress comes up to me and said, "What would you like?" And I said, "I'd like a very cold beer." And she says, "Fine." And she says, "Any preference?" I said, "No, whatever you have." So she opens the beer and pours it for me and says, "Anything else?" I said, "Yeah, do you have anything to nosh on, some potato chips or anything?" And in most of these bars, they have a big canister with chips available for customers. So she opened it and filled a bowl with chips and put it in front of me. And then she says, "Anything else, let me know." And I said, "Great." And I had that cold beer and the chips, and it was wonderful. And I'm looking up at the TV set, and the news has ended, and the late night movie's coming on. And it was an old favorite of mine, a comedy called I Married a Witch with Frederick March and Veronica Lake. Now, for those who can't recall this, Veronica Lake during the 1940s was one of the 3 famous pinups of the Second World War, along with Betty Grable and Rita Hayworth. Her face was everywhere. Locker rooms for the GIs and on boats, on planes, whatever. That's how famous Veronica Lake was. So I'm watching the movie and enjoying my chips and my beer. And the commercial break comes on, and I finish my beer. And the waitress comes up and says, "Would you like another one?" And I said, "Yeah, please." And she takes out another beer and pours it and walks away. And I'm waiting for the commercial break to end and for the movie to come back on. And suddenly I get the shakes. I don't know. I hope you haven't had the shakes. And I thought to myself, maybe because I haven't had anything to drink in a while, but my body is shaking. And I'm feeling an intensity that I couldn't explain. And I'm getting paranoid that the waitress would see me shaking and might call the police. And I'm just like this, overwrought. I don't know what to do. And the movie comes back on, and I'm watching a scene where Veronica Lake is about to tell Frederick March that she's a witch. And so I'm watching the movie. I'm watching Veronica Lake with that wonderful hair flowing over her eyes. And I'm scared and I'm still shaking. And I look over at the waitress to make sure she's not aware of what's going on with me. And I look back up at the movie at Veronica Lake, and then I look over at the waitress again, and then at Veronica Lake again at the waitress. And I suddenly realize the waitress is Veronica Lake.
Oops.
And the shakes leave me. And she noticed. And she comes up to me and sits on the stool beside me. And I'll never forget this as long as I live, along with that moment when the kids asked me, please, Mrs. Sittingbull, would you sign my autograph? She looks at me and says, it wasn't a bad movie, was it? And I looked at her and said, no, dear heart, it was a wonderful movie. She moved to Florida after that, and she lived there the rest of her life. But what a lesson in humility. She had no complaints. She had lived her life, become famous, and ended up being a waitress. But she was okay with that, still a loving human being.
Yeah, but she probably went to a, you get out of the limelight, you get out of the high paced life and everything else in that, and you come down and being a server or something like that. You know how many people you're actually meeting and talking to and being nice to, and people are being nice to you. Like you did not know who that was until something the two and two went together. I'm serious. I mean, people like that. There's nothing wrong with that. There really, really isn't. She could have been a millionaire. Better server.
Absolutely. I could go on and want to, with some time left, you talk about beautiful people like that, and then you get the other types of pissants. One of them that I met in Hollywood has become rather infamous, Harvey Weinstein.
Oh.
And I unfortunately had an interaction with him and Miramax in Hollywood. I and my family were producing a movie called Soulmates, and we were moving along. We had a wonderful director, James Fargo, who had directed movies for Clint Eastwood, and we were heading toward pre-production. And in Hollywood, once you are listed in the Hollywood Reporter and you're moving toward production, you get contacted by so many studios, and one of them was Miramax, and Weinstein wanted to see the script. And I said, sure. So I got him a copy of the script, and then he contacted me and the Hollywood Reporter and a lot of other people in Hollywood, telling them they should pass on our movie because it did not have enough sex and violence.
Oh, ouch.
Yeah, it hurt us very, very badly. And for all those women that he abused, I could just share this with that he's an abuser, period.
Mhm.
And abused a lot of people along the way. And but yet it's part of living, it's part of life. And I'm really sorry for everyone that had any interaction with him, pissant that he was. On the other end of the spectrum, if I could, because I know we're going to be out of
I
time.
was going to say, do you know how many people he actually hurt that
Oh
were
my
on
God.
his level?
Oh, I mean, by the hundreds.
Yeah.
By the hundreds. To go toward another one of the class acts, some years earlier, when my first wife and I were developing our repertory training program in New York City, we were reaching out to everyone in the theater district and otherwise. And one of the people who responded to us and invited us to lunch was Danny Thomas.
Oh.
We were overjoyed to meet him, and he was just a sweet a human being as you could ever hope to meet. And we asked him about how he developed St. Jude Hospital for Children, Now, in case people out there don't know that, St. Jude Hospital has helped thousands of children. And the remarkable thing about it, you don't pay. No one is sitting there saying, where's your insurance card? You got a child who needs help, St. Jude will help them. And we were talking to him about how he started St. Jude, and he shared some remarkable insights into it. And he told us basically at the time he started this, he had made a sworn oath to St. Jude that if he could become successful, he would build a hospital for children. People told him he was a fool. They laughed at him because he was just an ordinary barroom singer, and told him, who do you think you are that you're going to build a hospital? He did.
He did. Yeah.
He did.
And it is the most, other than things like the what's his, McDonald's house. And that is similar to it. But, he was just one of these kind of guys that when it wasn't, he was a giver, not a taker. He didn't care. He didn't care about anything.
Yeah. And again, a class act that I will remember as long as I live. Have we got more time? Because I could go on and on.
Well, I let you New Yorkers talk, and look what you guys do. Hey, but now with your I think it's Aardvark Abbey, maybe. You'll have to expand on that, but I believe that there was a young dancer that came to your place, and he's I think wanting to transition to acting and all that. But anyway,
okay, I'll take it from there. Yeah, one among the first students I and my first wife had was this dance team who came to New York by way of San Francisco. They came to New York to study acting, and he was the class clown, not in a disruptive way. He had a remarkable work ethic that he could do something that every time he did it, it was always amazing to me. Whenever something really important in terms of acting was being talked about, he would stop and just look deeply into the eyes of that person and kind of draw it in. And you felt he was sucking that right out of your mind so totally. And one of the last times I ever saw him was on 6th Avenue in New York City. He was with his dance partner, Ginny, and their roommate, Carol Nutter, who I dated at a certain point. And it was his birthday, and they were trying to scrounge up $8 for a bottle of wine, and they only had a few bucks. And I and my wife dug into our wallets, and we came up with the additional $6 so that he'd have a bottle of wine for his birthday. And I'm sure they did have that bottle of wine. And then he went on to great fame and fortune, and his name is Morgan Freeman.
Oh.
And when I met Morgan's agent in Hollywood, a lovely gal, and told her I'd like to make contact with Morgan. I'd like his help in one of our projects. She first established that I, in fact, had been his teacher, and that Aardvark Abbey was the school that him and Ginny Sandifer were at. And she promised that he would get back to me, but he never did. And I was very pissed off at that, because we played a part in his life, an important part, because had he not been in our school, he would not have had the teachings of the method master, Mark Gordon, and he would not have had the speech coach, Lynn Masters, who cultured his voice to become what it did become. And then when he opened his own production company, I looked it up. At the very top of it, I saw this. No unsolicited manuscripts accepted. You damn pissant, you.
Ooh, ouch.
When you were starting out, you were happy to get help from anyone, and there were a lot of people who helped you. But now you're so important, no unsolicited manuscripts accepted. With all your millions and your fame, you're nothing less than a pissant, unfortunately.
Well, actually, what we have to do, we got to do this again. I mean, this is the doctor. I mean,
Oh yeah.
I mean,
I would like to go on for another, 4 or 5 hours listening to you guys, because this is part of our history, and a lot of people don't know it. And with my show that you produce, it's all truth, and I like people to know the truth. So yeah, let's do this again.
I'm hoping that people that are on here, and there was a lot of people on here. I mean, I can see the graph of people, the check in, check out, whatever. These people, I'm sure, because they've been on there for a long, 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 long time, they must be either listening to memories that a parent, mother or father, and that will tell a child of, or they lived it. One of the two. Because they must remember the people that we're talking about. The people that we're talking about, and Nicholas, especially some of the ones that you were talking about, these are people that people know. I mean, my Henny, I mean, take my wife. I'm serious. I mean, let me tell you something. I was blown out of the water when I met his wife. I mean, it was, you never want, I'm serious. Now, I'm going to say this from my heart, okay? She was a little 4'11" Jewish lady that was she was the pinnacle of Jewish mothers. One of these kind of things. Because I'm serious, man. When I came in with that stuff and that, I mean, I'm a slender guy, First thing she said, we got to put something on your butt. Come here already, she says. Listen, I'm going to get this for you. You're going to sit down in that chair. I mean, she was so cool. I mean, seriously. And the things are, this is, our past. If our past went on first, should I say, fast steps up till now, could you imagine everything that happened in our lives a long time ago happening again today? The things that are going on today wouldn't have happened at all.
Right.
We had so many things. They were good, they were bad. We took them, we acted on them, we did or did not fight or get mad. If we did get mad, it was just like that. Boom. Bad is over. Today, people are going to go and go and go. For instance, and I'll give you a for instance, I hear Trump's name every day on the radio and the TV. Why? He left the White House in January. Why do we have to keep on having this shoved down our throat all the time? Well, it's his fault. It's his fault. It's his fault. What fault? You're there. It's your fault now, man. Eat it. Take it. Live it.
Absolutely.
Own it.
Absolutely.
And they're not doing that. A long, long time ago, though, whatever we did, we'd say, okay, we did it.
Yeah.
Have you ever watched the movie East Side Kids?
Way back then, not the original one.
The original one was the late 40s.
Yeah.
And that was they were a bunch of kids in that from New York that were, I mean, they had their gangs and the whole thing, but their gangs were clean gangs. And if they did things, they played tricks on people or they stole hubcaps. Today, I mean, it's not the same thing. Today, it's a bunch of kids in that are taking heroin or playing games and that on Facebook, and that to pour hot oil off somebody's head and things. I mean, this is a different time we're in right now. I mean, I look at it all the time, and I say to people all the time that I meet, what you have to do is you got to look in the mirror and say, I love you. If you look in the mirror and look in your eyes, because your eyes are the windows to the world, just say, I love you. When you walk out of that bathroom, after you looked in that mirror, you'll be a different person. I guarantee. Because if everybody did the same thing, this world would be different. The whole world. And what you're talking about, Nicholas, I'm telling you right now, we're going to do this again. And I'm serious. I mean, people are really listening. They're they ain't saying a word. We even have the telephone thing over here that's usually all lit up, and instead of that, they're online listening.
I'm looking forward to doing it again, Bob, Randall.
It is a lot of fun. But until that time, hold those thoughts. Oh, yeah. We have a million things that are going on right now. Randall, how do we get in touch with you?
Oh, email. Please contact me at mirabelle.nozawa@gmail.com, mirabelle.nozawa@gmail.com.
Nicholas, how can we get in touch with you? Aardvark Nick, that's AARDVARK, Nick with a K, NICK, @yahoo.com.
Well, there you go. Thank you, gentlemen. You were awesome.
Thank you, Bob.
And like I always say, it's a big world. Guess what? We are the world. You are the world. Love is the most important word in the world. What I'd like everyone to do is love your neighbor. Love what you're doing. Hold a door. Let somebody go through a red light in front of you. Don't try to cut them off. Do things that you wouldn't do today. Do it now, because we are in the now. God bless y'all. Bob Charles.